Good afternoon, everyone. This is Wayne MacNaughton. He is a longtime anti-poverty activist who has been a participant in many groups engaged in the struggle to end poverty and homelessness, including the Community Advocates Network, Community Action on Homelessness, Canada Without Poverty, and the ATD Fourth World Movement. He has lived for many years in or near poverty and has been active with Basic Income Nova Scotia since 2016. It is my pleasure to present you Wayne MacNaughton.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and I want to thank Mandy and Pierre and the organizers of this for giving me an opportunity to speak today. I have to say I'm actually one of the organizers of it, but I didn't ask myself. I have to do a couple of disclaimers first. I'm going to be talking today about basic income and people with disabilities, and some of it's going to overlap with some of the things that have already been mentioned, and that's, I think, a good thing. I'm not a representative of people living with disabilities. I am an individual, just like a couple of other people have said. I'm Wayne MacNaughton. I'm an individual, and I'm giving my individual views on these various matters, and they aren't the views of any other organization, including Basic Income Nova Scotia, necessarily. I guess I'm going to start by just commenting on something that hasn't even really been mentioned today, but in the throne speech, the previous throne speech, the one of the government that was just replaced, which looks exactly like the same government, I have to say. They had, in fall of 2020, the government promised a basic income for people with disabilities. That was one of the things they mentioned. And since that time, I understand that they've started to undertake some consultations on that. I take my hat off to them, because the way they have announced it, I don't know. They're in for a real round of inputs there that are going to confuse the heck out of them, because it's a bit of a confusing field. What we have right now in this country, as has been mentioned or alluded to earlier by other people, is a real patchwork of programs for people with disabilities, and they varies from province to province. And it varies in various other ways as well. And myself, when they say, well, basic income for people with disabilities, I say, yeah, great. That would be wonderful. I'm happy to see any group in our society, be able to have access to a basic income the same way that seniors do and families with young children do. I think that would be a good thing. The trick is how do you do it? And more importantly is, why just people with disabilities? Why not go for a basic income for everyone, with the only proviso what Mandy has mentioned, based on their level of income. If your level of income is below a certain amount, you should be eligible for a basic income. And that would actually help more people with disabilities than having some kind of a specialized disability benefit that looks like a basic income. The reason I say that is because it goes back to some of the stuff that Kendall was just mentioning earlier. When you start talking about disabilities, there's like a whole different range of disabilities that people might have. You go from the very partially disabled, like I was, and to the partially disabled whose disabilities are continually worsening, like I am now. You have people that are absolutely, totally disabled to the point where they need special adaptations to their homes and they need constant care and things like that. And you have people who are disabled who are able, with a few adjustments to their home and with sufficient income, to live their lives in a normal way. So I would say that, and it looks like and most of the federal programs that exist, like the Canada Pension Plan, Disability Plan, or the federal tax credit, income tax credit for people with disabilities, are based on the more extreme examples of disability. Like the idea that, ironically, they're also very much tied to work and the ability to do work, like that's paid work. And one of the things that we talk about with of course, with a basic income is that your work status should not matter, would not matter in a basic income. I'm going to suggest that your ability status should not matter either in order to get the basic, the basic income of, you know, the base amount of basic income, if you like. That check of, say, whether it's $2,000 a month or whatever the amount comes out to, right away, people that are, anybody that's on any disability welfare anywhere in this country would be enormously better off with that, with just that. Add to the fact that for many people, that would really be all they need. People like with only partial disabilities or don't need a lot of extra help or a lot of extra care, that may well be enough to live a very full life and to be able to go on and try to achieve whatever they can achieve in their own personal life without needing any more. At the same time, there should be some kind of an additional benefit that's available to people who have those extraordinary disabilities, those extraordinary limitations that require them to undertake a lot of other expensive things like expensive places to live, constant care and things like that. So there still needs to be something for that. But I think if you start with giving a basic income to everybody, wow. What's happening right now, and again, I'm adding a little bit to some of what Kendall said, he did a fabulous job, Kendall, on all this, is that people will go and if the welfare that you get for being considered fully able to take work is pathetic. They're all pathetic, but I mean really pathetic. There's no way anybody is living on that for any length of time. And that's, you know, because it's just not adequate to even meet the most basic needs. Most people, it would barely cover their rent, and many people it doesn't cover their rent. So what happens is people then go and okay, well, and then they go and see a doctor or whatever, and they get their disability, whatever their disabilities or limitations are, however minor or major they might be, get the medical documentation so that they can get the higher welfare check, which they need, or they get the special needs, which they need. Again, going to see medical help for all of that. Well, imagine not having to go and get all that medical information, that you get a basic check of enough that it's going to cover for the day-to-day expenses of anybody, including most people that are currently receiving welfare. There's two different types of welfare. There's welfare for people, there's people who have limitations to employment, and really it's only that, as Kendall said, that small amount extra per month that they get, plus they don't have to look for work, or they don't have the same kind of work requirements put on them. And then there's the welfare, the services for persons with disabilities, which is pretty hard to get in Nova Scotia, but it does exist, and that's to provide the extra benefits for people who need continual care and so on. The only people that should be required to go and get a medical information in order to get that basic income, that basic money that they need to live an ordinary life, no one should be having to go and get medical information for that. That should be automatic for anybody that's got a low income. And that's, I believe, what the federal government should be aiming for. They should put that in place. And by the way, it would actually probably cost less for the government to implement that, because they don't, every time somebody's going to see their doctor to get more forms filled out so they can get that, extra, special needs allowance or whatever, the government's paying for that. And that adds up after a while. They don't mention the cost, and then they have the cost of the caseworker who's got to sit and go through this, and quite often has to refer to a casework supervisor. I think they even have to go to a committee of casework supervisors in order to get it approved. There's a whole bureaucratic mess, as was mentioned earlier, to go through to get that. So here's what I would think. Okay, here's my own personal vision of how I would like it to work, is that everybody who has a low income should be eligible to receive a basic amount that's enough to cover their housing, their food, their clothing, their transportation, communication, and some entertainment and so on. Sort of the basic, which is what is mentioned in our principles that Mandy elaborated on at the beginning. Everyone should be able to get that if their income's low. And then you provide, as I say, an additional amount that's available for people who are able to provide medical information about having a very severe need. And very importantly, and most importantly, maintain and improve significantly the healthcare services we have now. The healthcare system needs to be actually improved, it needs to be enlarged, especially around things like mental health care and pharmacare and all of that sort of stuff. There's definite need for a lot of improvement there. And I would suggest that you can turn, and then when I say about the idea of people applying for an extra amount that need it, that should not be going to a caseworker at community services who has no training in medical or other, or even, you know, I know a couple of social workers who get really offended when you call caseworkers social workers, because a lot of them aren't social workers. They don't even have that qualification, much less any medical qualifications. So they shouldn't be making the decisions, and they shouldn't be asking these invasive questions like Kendall was saying. There's no need for that. You can make sure that everybody has enough income. You'll be surprised how fast we could turn this society around. We could turn this province around. The doors that would open up, somebody mentioned earlier, they were asking about entrepreneurship. Guess what? You want to boom in entrepreneurship, start a basic income all across the board. You would see more entrepreneurship than you could ever possibly imagine. People, when given the opportunity to try other things, will try other things. People should be able to go and, compared to say what happens right now in income assistance, people should be able to go out and, oh well, there's a job there, I don't know if I can do it. You know, I'm still having trouble with this or that or whatever, something that is going on in their life. Maybe they've got problems at home or whatever. Well, I'll go and try it. So they will. They go and try it. If you have a basic income in place, you can go and try something out. If it doesn't work out or something happens that you have to leave that employment, you're not going to be penalized for it, because that's, you know, perfectly okay. You're still going to have that basic income to fall back on. And one of the things that keeps people on income assistance in some cases is the fact that they don't dare try something unless they're absolutely sure that it's going to work out and absolutely sure that they're going to be able to maintain it. So that's a strong disincentive to people going out and trying to get work. And by the way, that comment about, I'm sorry, no, anybody who thinks that 50% of the people on income assistance shouldn't be there has never had to go through an annual review, has never had to deal with a caseworker at community services. Believe me, the people that are on income assistance need it, and they've had to prove it and prove it and prove it over and over again. So I guess that's what I'm saying. That's the vision I have, and I think there's a lot of other things that can be done, like the other thing that we talk about with the basic income is what it should not do. We need to be very careful with this, with what the government is currently proposing as well, is that, excuse me for a moment, is what gets rolled into it. If you're talking about a new government program, what government programs is it going to replace? As far as I'm concerned, the only government program that basic income should replace is income assistance. And it would render income assistance redundant, and it could completely replace it. As far as any other government program is concerned, with social programs that help people, that housing programs, health programs, daycare, as was mentioned, various things like that. Anything that's a contributory program, Canada Pension Plan, employment insurance, those should not be affected by implementing a basic income. There's no reason for it, because those are not funded from tax dollars, they're funded by contributions. Any workplace or union benefit that you have, that is a pension benefit or a health benefit or whatever, coming from your workplace or your union, that should not be affected by having a basic income. And most importantly as well, even though it's a government, even though you're saying the basic income is coming from the federal government, it should not in any way affect veterans' pensions and veterans and military disability pensions. Those should still continue the way they are. WCB can still continue the way it is because, again, it's funded by contributions. And that's the thing, is that we can put a basic income in place. I think one of the best descriptions I saw of a basic income is that basic income should cover all of your basic needs. Work should be for disposable income. And I think that's maybe the way we need to start. We need to start looking at our definition of what is work and what, when I think of all of the potential that's out there for people to do a lot of different things, I don't know why. You know, I'm one of these people that's mystified as well. Is what more is it going to take to get the politicians off their derrieres and start to say this is a much better way to do things? This is moving us as a society in the direction of a sharing economy, a sharing communities. And I sincerely hope that we're able to move in that direction. I know I'm not going to get everything that I just mentioned that I dream about seeing happen, but I'd like to see us start to move in that direction in some way. I really would, because it's, you know, there's far too much suffering, far too many people that are suffering all the time now, and there's no reason why something can't be done. As has been said, it was shown with the way they did the CERB in an instant. They got this up and running. They could get a basic income up and running as well as fast as that, because they've already got a lot of examples on how to do it from various pilot projects all over the world and from the various other programs that the government has already done. So let's get busy and let's do it.
Thank you, Wayne. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you. That was amazing without referring to a watch. 20 minutes flat.
I didn't even time myself. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for showing us your... You were allowed to keep on until 3:25. So, thank you very much for giving us your vision of what a basic income would do for people with disabilities. And I'm opening it up to the floor now to ask if there are any questions for Wayne or any discussion points. I see Pierre on the edge of his seat, but also Jen right down here. So I'm going to give it to Jen first, Pierre, and then you.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could also speak a little bit to the ways that how we think about what a disability is, or what qualifies as being disabled, is part of the problem here. And I'll just say where this question's coming from. I have a condition in my legs that I acquired after having surgery that prevents me from standing for long periods of time, and I have to get constant care and treatment for that. That's not covered. It's really expensive. I have to wear compression garments that are $500 per pair, and I have to wear them all the time. I can't not wear them. I get really bad, painful swelling in my legs if I don't wear them. But I'm not disabled. It doesn't qualify as a disability, but I still need accommodations from my employer and other things like that. And so, to me, I think, I guess, and I'd like you to respond to this, but I'd just like to say what I take from your talk is that putting in a basic income would redress the ways that we draw a line as to what is a disability and what is not.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think one of the things that is one of the things, and I haven't done the math on this. I don't pretend to have an actual statistic, but I wonder what percentage of society actually are people that have some disability or another. It's part of the human existence that we all have in each case, individual, different limitations, physical limitations and emotional limitations to what we can and cannot do. And to try and categorize those and try to say, okay, it's a little bit like some of the ways that we've tackled income security in our society. We have this notion, which is a very 19th century industrial revolution notion of the deserving poor versus the undeserving poor. And we're always trying to define who is the deserving poor, who should we give help to. And that's when we do with disability, we're doing essentially the same thing. Well, which disabilities deserve help and which don't? You know, like which are people should just get themselves better, kind of thing. And I think, you know, we've got to get I'd like to see us recognize a little better that a lot of these things are just labels, and you know, I would dare say, you know, most people, you know, it's interesting that even community services, even welfare as it exists right now, recognizes that when people are over 55, they should get a higher welfare check. Well, yeah, because most people over 55 have a disability of some kind. I don't care, you know, probably 90% of the people over 55 have a disability of some kind. It's normal. It's what happens as we age. So I really would like to see us get away from some of these labels.
Okay, Pierre, I know that you had a question.
Yeah, it's I think, in a way, Jennifer's question sort of partly covers it. But I think there's probably a couple of sources for disability incomes. One is simply private insurance, and another one is, you know, simply have it as a benefit of employment. So if you're on welfare and you then have to get welfare disability, it almost seems to me like it's a disability on top of a disability, because if I understand correctly from Kendall, we're looking at a fairly small amount per month that you get extra on top of already an abysmally low income level. Who decides, and it seems to be a fixed amount of disability that you get, or maybe a maximum of a couple of $100, but who decides, you know, let's say like if that is enough to live on in terms of a disability? And do you have any insight in that in terms of, you know, let's say like trying to deal with a disability while you are on income and have not enough to sort of cover the cost of disabilities?
I would only add one thing to what Kendall was saying as well. If you have a private disability plan, Pierre, or one through your work, that will be deducted dollar for dollar from any income assistance that you're entitled to. Okay, they say, oh yeah, you got a disability insurance, fine, you don't need our help. So yeah, no, it is a challenging question to decide, and really what government programs have done is come up with an arbitrary figure, just in some cases literally just pulled out of the air. And a lot of the time it has to do with trying to get people to go to work, because what it boils down to, they don't want to raise income assistance rates because, you know, if people can get more on assistance than they can get working part-time for a minimum wage, well, we can't have that. I'm sorry. First of all, raise the minimum wage, and second of all, that shouldn't be the criteria. But that's the way governments have generally viewed this.
Hi, this is to follow along from private and pensions and you know, what we're calling public welfare. My big thing is, you know, I'm thinking, because, you know, I grew up in a family where my father worked for the federal government and had a boyfriend that worked for the federal government, and they, you know, had a deduction from their paycheck every 2 weeks that, you know, wasn't a significant amount of money, you know, $15, $20, whatever. And when they reached the age of majority, 55 plus, whatever, they retired and had, nice, handsome pension and continued, paying that $5 a month, continued having the general services insurance medical plan. And, why we couldn't have that for everybody? Like, the federal government already does it, so why not do it for everybody? Because wouldn't they even get a better rate if they had, 30 million people on it as opposed to maybe 350,000?
Do you have a response to that? Wayne?
I don't have a response to that. I'm only kidding when I say this, Amy. You're being too logical. But you know what I mean. It's yeah. There are so many ways that we can improve a lot of things. But I think what we should be working on in terms of disabilities is making sure that everybody, including people with disabilities, have enough money to meet their basic needs, and that our healthcare system is improved and expanded enough to treat people for the various disabilities they have without them having to dig into their own pockets to do it or whatever. And that should all be included under a healthcare system. And I'd like to see us move to a system of more government rehabilitation services providing help to people who need, for example, medical appliances or adaptations to their homes, rather than relying on charities like Easter seals to fill that hole.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you too very much for the presentation. And it seems to me that a lot of what you're talking about, Wayne, fits in with other things that we've been talking about, that we have this really narrow, limited model of who counts in our society, and it is basically white, male, able-bodied, unencumbered by children, even if they have them, largely. And the rest of us are all somehow defective. And with women and people with disabilities, this idea that you're either in the labor force or you're out. You have a disability or you don't. Like, all of these things do not at all reflect the complexity and diversity of people's lives. So I think your call for a basic income for everybody to set that foundation is so important.
Yes.
Yes. Is there? Okay. Thank you. Is there a question online? No? Okay. They're very silent online, apparently.
Thanks, Wayne. I was wondering if you could tell me sort of what some of the things that you see a basic income could do for the most vulnerable people, I include people with disabilities, like myself. I guess what I'm wondering is, for example, when you talked about entrepreneurship being spurred by a basic income, it makes me think, okay, people with disabilities could become part-time entrepreneurs. There'll be more part-time entrepreneurs, so there'll be more employment available, in more traditional sectors. So people with disabilities would benefit in that way as well. So I'm just wondering if you have any other ideas of how people with disabilities and the most vulnerable people, like how the world would look and change with basic income.
Well, I think, not so much, I don't know whether it's change, but it would validate those people's lives. It's the idea of providing an income with dignity and everything. If a person wanted to, say, try their hand at some kind of a small business, producing some kind of a product or doing something artistic or something, they would be able to do that and not have to worry about where their income is coming from when they do that. But also they would have the opportunity to do just volunteer work or do just some other kind of personal development or anything like that. Would be, right now, if you try to do that under the current income assistance system, you're punished because you're not out there trying to find work. Or if you make money in that way, you get hit twice actually when you're on disability welfare. One is that if you go and you get a part-time job and you start making some money, okay, that's going to get partly clawed back. But after a certain point as well, and it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction in Canada, I have to say. But some places they'll actually punish you and say, well, really, if you can work, you're not really disabled, are you? What, you know, why should you be getting disability welfare when you're able to work? So there's a lot of catch-22s built into the present system, and I think what this does is it gives, you know, the word I like to use is choice, and I know some people don't like that word too much because they think it means something else, but having a basic income gives people choice. There are two things in our society that are actually, people think they're free, but they're not. There's voice and there's choice, and they're both commodities. If you have enough money, you have choice. If you have enough money, you have voice. If you don't, you're out of luck. So I think that's one of the things that this does. It provides people with a choice as to what they want to do or are able to do with their lives, and to adjust that as they go through their lives. It's, you're not stuck in the same thing your entire life because that's what you were decided you could do when you were 25 or whatever. Maybe when you're 55 you want to do something else. Well, if you have a steady income coming in to cover your expenses, you can do that.
Is there anybody else?
Thank you again. I don't have a question as much as I do a comment, and I was just inspired by something that you were saying, Wayne, and it strikes me that, as we, I was looking at Andy Fillmore's face over there. I don't know him. Looks like a nice man. He's got a nice smile. But I think one of the things politicians are really good at is really we've got such low expectations. So I think we allow this patchwork of programs to be called a healthcare system, but we actually don't have a healthcare system. We have a semi-functioning sick care system, and I think what I'm hearing about, basic income is healthcare. Healthcare shouldn't be divorced from access to food, access to housing, access to adequate income. So I think in our framing of how we advocate for basic income, I think it's that missing piece, the healthcare system that has eluded us for so long.
Absolutely. I think basic income is a huge preventative aspect of the healthcare system. Is there anybody else who has a comment or a question? Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. So, thank you so much, Wayne, for your speech. Of course, my question pertains to what would be on the politicians' radar in particular to funding and taxation. So I want to know what your response is to the following devil's advocate counter-argument. It's not my view, it's just playing devil's advocate purely. Basic income, be it either the form of a one-size-fits-all check or negative income tax, comes with a cost to taxpayers. Unless there is a dollar-for-dollar reallocation of existing public funds, would there be an increase in taxes? With respect to your vision of basic income, how could this project be funded? Does it involve the raising of taxes, and if so, how?
I think I'm not the expert on this, but I know there's a lot of, this is one of the things that BICN has done a lot of work on, is with their policy options that Sheila was talking about, of how you fund these basic income. My own personal thing is that I'm all in favor of raising taxes on corporations and raising taxes particularly, and finding ways to tax, especially working to and even raising taxes on high income individuals, like income individuals that are making over $250,000 a year, things like that. I don't think it's much of a stretch. Like if you look at the way the government spends their money now, I don't think it's a big stretch to reallocate some of that. You can reallocate something like $90 billion that goes to in tax credits to the big oil companies. There's tax credits to other large profitable corporations. Those things could be easily turned around to whatever extent. Again, it's a choice by politicians. It's a policy choice. They can decide to give tax breaks to major corporations who claim they're creating jobs, but in fact are eliminating jobs, or they can give a break to average citizens. You know, it's.
Okay, one more question or comment.
Sorry, can I ask a question of the questioner? Because I hear this all the time too, this one-size-fits-all thing as a criticism of basic income. What on earth does that mean? Like, I don't get it.
Can you answer that? I don't know if you can.
I'll go 6 feet and take the mask off here. So to answer that question on what a one-size-fits-all universal basic income would be is essentially a unique check that would be paid out to every single citizen. And on the opposite end of the spectrum to that, the other form of a basic income would be a form of a negative income tax, which is essentially a calculation of your benefit for basic income that is pitted against your earned income. The more earned income you have, the less of that benefit you get until you reach a certain level of earned income, and then that benefit is exhausted. Does that answer the question, or you want more detail, or? I think it might.
Thank you very much, and I want to give you this because I think it goes back to what I said at the very beginning of our conference today, and that is that it's really of critical importance when we're talking about a basic income that we talk about the basic income that we want, the basic income that we want the government to implement. And the basic income we want isn't the Stockton model of $500 a month for everybody, or that small number of people they selected to get it. The basic income we want is a basic income that raises a person above the poverty line, everybody above the poverty line. And the only requirement for it is that, sorry, I ran out of air. The only requirement is that you can show that you need that. So the only requirement is the income level you currently have, and you get it above that. So I wanted to hand you that document because it defines the basic income we want as well as the principles associated with that basic income.
If I may, and I hope I interpret the question correctly, but I think your question was about taxes. And I think we should sort of look at this a little bit historically. And we have income tax and business tax, and our tax system is supposed to be based on horizontal and vertical equity. And in the last, I would say, 40 years, since the, shall we say, the Reagan and the Thatcher era, that principle has been completely corrupted to the point where taxes have changed so much that the income inequality has drastically increased in favor of the rich people. In other words, we have had a tax system that has evolved to the point where horizontal and vertical equity is totally gone. So if we talk about a basic income, we definitely talk about income redistribution, but with the idea of undoing a bit of what has been happening in the last 40 years, where the philosophy was make sure that the rich gets more money because then it can trickle down to the poor. Well, we have seen over 40 years how much trickle-down effect there is, right? So if we talk about a basic income, first of all, there are basic income policies that are tax neutral. There are basic incomes that are, shall we say, income revenue neutral. But all of them, the tax neutral one does, for instance, not necessarily involve tax increases or tax changes. But if we want a progressive basic income that embraces tax reform, etc., then we should be willing to look at redistribution of income, where the rich will start paying more taxes, as they traditionally did, where the businesses started to pay more taxes, as they traditionally did, and where the poor will get a livable income, where Canada becomes a livable country. $640 million a year. No, sorry, I said that wrong. $640 billion a year from business leaves the country to tax-free havens. So, yes, we can have a basic income, and yes, there are some people that can afford to pay more taxes. Hope that answered it? Okay.
That was a beautiful answer. Thank you very much, Pierre. We have to stop this conversation now, and thank you for the question. I think it's a really important one because you're absolutely right that these sorts of issues come up all the time. And so having responses to them are very, very important. I want to thank you, Wayne, for participating and for your very interesting and useful talk. And it certainly generated a lot of discussion, as you can see, and interest. So really appreciate it. If somebody could come down and help with setting the podium back for our next speaker, please.